This Institute of New Economic Thinking, INET, Young Students Initiative YSI, Identity Theft webinar was presented at the Oakville Central Library on June 20th, 2025. Mike Kosh is the webinar chair, and I am Tony Crawford, invited to tell my story as a bank system whistleblower.
I'm Vashi Capellos. Today on Power and Politics. Rewarding the rich. The CRA's own auditors say Canada's tax system disproportionately benefits the wealthy, according to a new poll. 1,700 tax experts who work for the CRA were surveyed. 9 out of 10 of them agree with this statement. It is easier for corporations and wealthy individuals to evade and or avoid tax responsibilities than it is for average Canadians. And 8 out of 10 agree with this statement. Tax credits, tax exemptions, and tax loopholes disproportionately benefit corporations and wealthy Canadians compared to average Canadians. So why do those loopholes still exist, and what will it take to close them?
My name is Tony Crawford, and I am a Canadian bank system whistleblower since 2017. I am an advocate to criminalize confidence tricks that steal wealth from private and public bank accounts. This is a review of Dirty Money from Queen's University professor Christian Leuprecht in 2023. That organized crime is on the rise in Canada. This INET YSI Identity Theft webinar has 3 takeaways. 1. Identity theft and money laundering business scenarios. 2. Business case to digitize law in financial systems. And 3. System gap analysis methodology, how to close loopholes. This webinar expands 3 basics about money and identity theft. 1. Money is born of credit, that if there were no debt, there would be no money. 2. All that is accredited money, except coin, is a promise to pay. 3. Identity theft is contrived to acquire property and move the creditworthy of one person to another to coin cash on demand, typically known as counterfeit and money laundering. This webinar also expands 3 basics about money laundering. 1. Double presentment is the use of forged documents. 2. Casino banking includes cash deposits and false bookkeeping. 3. Treasure Island is corporate and personal tax avoidance and evasion, also improperly earned income tax credits IEITC offset to tax shortfalls known as wind bills and windmills in legal circles. The 1694 Bank of England was created from government policy to print money capitalized from the incorporated tax credit worth of taxpayers, bonded into service the national debt cost of money behind the first private bank public deficit economy in the world. The medieval bank system plan replaced tax-paid tally-stick receipt interest-free currency with tax interest to collect for the bank that printed signed promises to pay pound coins for pound notes that charged the rent interest cost of money for unpaid tax bills as bills of exchange to use as legal tender. Signed promises to pay money for Bank of England banknotes circulated through countrywide bank cash flows that coined gold standard fractional reserve capital movements through the bank system and revenue streams in tax budget accounts. Even today, government-thrown speeches still announce election promises in budgets after tax returns to public wealth that bond issues of unpaid tax bills continue in cash flows as money in circulation in deficit economies. Real economy, collective principle, a central bank holds a social lien on national debt tax value received, is not the same as shadow banking wind bills, which are spiritual liens on notional debt value deceived to raise credit on counterfeit, nothing received. Tax credit wind bills garnish gullible taxpayer income tax deductions that monetize fictitious bill fixed papered interest laundered for cash through tax avoidance revenue shortfalls that conceal tax evasion public debt treasury losses not reported in the budget. A wind bill is an 18th century fictitious bill used to kite worthless accommodation paper presented for credit at face value. The modern-day rent-seeking tax arbitrage version monetizes ABCP, asset-backed commercial paper, through taxation. and its codependent twice-paid tax credit wind bill is the broken money rule. Broken money rules are made from broken money acts voted into existence by members of Parliament. In 1907, Pitman's Bills, Checks and Notes defined the Bills of Exchange Act 1882 how bankers fulfill the broken money rule. This study reviews the nemo dat quod non habet enigma that defies the logic one cannot give what one does not have, that the maker of a promise to pay a debt is money to its holder, even if stolen in the hands of a thief. Negotiable instruments differ from ordinary chattels. A rough and ready test of negotiability is tried in the question, can title be made to a thief? If the answer is yes, the financial instrument is negotiable. If the answer is no, it is not negotiable. The broken money warning is clear in Pitman's Bills, Checks and Notes. A banker must never sign a wind bill. A banker must never sign a wind bill. Any taxpayer can sign a promise to pay money for a tax credit wind bill private imaginary dollar as a tax credit saver tax bill maker that a treasury conversion reissues a public notional national debt real dollar to its holder in due course. Tax shelter TS007385 is a $5 million rent-encumbered mortgage on commercial real estate selling rent-loss tax credits as an investment that gullible taxpayers signed wind bill mortgage credit default swaps and blank demand notes subsequently rubber-stamped with a bank logo and filled out for an unnumbered bank loan that couldn't be sold or defraud without it. The bank denied the loan-dependent wind bill that a judge ruled for the bank to clear debt without trial and to dismiss counterclaims against the promoter collecting the mortgage credit default swap wind bill and cross-claims which were presented in another court that ordered the tax credit wind bill paid in cash twice over.
What happens when you sink your savings into an investment only to find a bank is calling you saying you owe them money, lots of money? Well, that's what happened to our next guest. Tony Crawford is the author of The Perfect Sting, and he joins us in studio, as does Robert Beers, a financial planner and tax consultant who has seen more than his share of people who unwittingly became sitting ducks for the big banks. Tony, could you very quickly tell us what happened to you?
Yes, this started in 1989 when my accountant came with me with some advice to put some money into an investment for a tax-saving opportunity. And what I wasn't aware was that there was a bank loan involved with this as a secondary risk. 10 years later, a bank came to me and told me that I owed them about $100,000 based on the fact that I had signed up for an investment that was supposed to have some payback and ownership in property.
And you had no idea at all. This hit you like a ton of bricks.
Absolutely no idea. This was a total surprise to me. And when the bank called me about this, they showed me documents that I had signed, and indeed I had signed a contract to the investment provider. They're called promoters. But the investment promoter had taken my signature to a bank with a signature affidavit that I wanted to borrow money, and the money went into the investment product.
Robert, how many times have you heard stories like Tony's before?
Oh, far too many, unfortunately. But I'd say since the late 80s to recently in about 2003, quite a few, well over 200 to 300 a year.
What happens? Are these legitimate investors that come up and just have some sort of a scam, or I mean, who are these people?
Well, they're called a promoter. They have a particular investment, whether it could be a real estate piece of property, a film, or a software type of syndication deal. And in order for them to complete the transaction, they've got to have investors such as Tony Crawford. And in order to sell the security, because that's what they're selling, they're not selling real property, they're selling a security in the syndication deal, they've got to be paid. And quite often they will use a bank to assist them in the process of being paid. This was quite a large syndication deal. There was at one time listed 308 limited partners throughout Canada and the United States.
And the banks aren't held accountable at all?
Well, the banks simply are providing financing. The bank's view is this is a deal that's based upon the individual's ability to pay back a debt. The misconception, or I guess the misgivings or the misrepresentation, depending on how you want to interpret it, really comes from the promoter's point of view, where they are saying that the bank is on side, when in fact the bank really isn't on side. The bank is really there to make a loan.
Promissory note was signed and not dated. We know that. It says right on it. So it has nothing to do with the bank. It's not signed. Yeah. No, you signed a note directly to the bank. You signed a note directly to the bank.
We don't know anything about it. You could sign a million of those. I wouldn't know.
Nobody knows how many units are involved until you approve a loan.
I don't know about that.
You don't know about that. But what is a bank document doing with signatures from third parties?
Okay, to confirm that it was to try to get some confirmation that it was your authentic, genuine signature on the note, which is, I believe...
And this is the process for offsite closing. Terms and conditions of a loan are not awareness of debt. You meet terms and conditions of loans before you get the debt. So it's one comes before the other. And to meet terms and conditions, the bank has to get the documentation. Then you meet the terms and conditions, right?
The acknowledgement and agreement contains the loan terms.
Yeah, the form that you signed. You signed a whole bunch of documents. If you didn't know what you were signing, that's your problem. It's your problem you don't read what you signed.
The question is, if a government knew of a sleazy bank practice that tricks people into debt with tied loans based on third parties representing other people's signatures to link secret debts with retirement investment plans, would a government side with the banks to allow profiteering to continue, or would a government expose it and do something to protect people from a debt crisis?
Okay, Tony, thank you for your question. First of all, Tina.
Tony presented this situation to the NDP Drink Riding Association at the beginning of December, and you may also have seen his highly visible van parked around town to publicise his indignation. As Tony described his experience of an identity theft to the NDP members at the town restaurant, their reaction swung from the initial denial, that doesn't happen in Canada, surely, to doubt and then horror at the idea that yes, it could, and it probably happens more often than we realise if it was allowed to go unchecked. Hundreds of Canadians have suddenly found themselves responsible for millions of dollars in debt. You have to acknowledge the situation that exists and then strengthen the powers of the Security Commission so they can prevent this practice.
Terence Young.
Thank you very much. I know the gentleman who's calling. In fact, I took some time about 8 weeks ago to meet with him in his home to understand his issue and to look for potential solutions. And I've committed, if we form a government, I will meet with the new Minister of Finance and we will correct the situation and put it in legislation and stop it from happening.
Thank you. Laura Domsey.
First of all, I'd like to say that in all banks, and this is just from my personal experience because that's where I'm employed, that if you are not following, compliance and audit regulations, then you're not doing your job, and a bank isn't going to keep you around for a very long time. Second of all, if that is happening, then I believe that as soon as the government finds out about it, they would put a stop to it, most definitely. And also, I think that banks have to be, doing their due diligence to ensure that they are knowing their customer, they know the person who's sitting across from them, and that they're not doing anything that has to do with tied loans, which is also illegal. It's illegal to do any sort of tied selling. And I think that, yes, the government would definitely be against that and put a stop to it right away.
Bonnie Brown.
Thank you very much. I, too, am aware of Tony and his case. He has brought it to my attention. I have received all the papers that he has about his case, and I have taken them to the Finance Department, and I believe they ended up in the office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. The answer we got back over that was that nothing could be done.
That's not a bank promissory note.
I'm sorry, and this promissory note in the bank's documents that we're relying on
isn't witnessed either.
Correct. You sent a blank promissory note to the bank, and the fact is that the purpose of this was meant to try to get some verification that they were getting your signature on the note. They did get your signature on the note.
Tell us, what steps did you take when you found out you owed all this money? And it was a lot of money, was it?
It was a lot of money, and it wasn't just once. My wife was in a similar scheme for $40,000.
Wow.
And that was totally unknown to us until the bank told me about my debt.
So what did you do?
Well, I obviously had to respond to the claim, and as the information came to me, I realized that there were third parties involved in this that I could make a counterclaim against, and that involved the accountant, that involved the actual promoter of the product, and of course the bank. And in the course of discussion, they told me that I was a sitting duck and that I would have to pay regardless, that the bank is perfectly entitled to reclaim the money simply because of the way the documentations are put together. And I had already written books in the past, and I thought there has to be a story here. So when this occurred 3 years ago, I began to take a diary, and gradually the book came together, and we're calling it The Perfect Sting.
Now, this was all legal. What they did was legal, is that correct?
I understand that everything is legal, and I have tried every angle, which has given me an opportunity to have emotional highs and emotional lows of incredible proportion. Sometimes I think I'm onto something, but I understand that the Canadian law is really in conflict with the ethics the banks promote they have. They don't have to have business ethics because the law says that whatever they do is going to be okay, and in this case they did far more than they should.
So loan, evidenced by problems in personal loan service application.
So what I can tell you is what's here doesn't matter. We don't get into the kind of due diligence that you're referring to because we're lending to you based on your credit. You can go blow your brains out, that's fine. We lend to you on your credit worthiness. On the merits of the investment, we don't look at it. Is it a good investment or not? That's not our expertise. It's what was inputted into CCAPs that matters. Well, the bank computer is actually the credit decisioning machine. So what's inputted into the computer is what's important, not what's on the piece of paper. The bank probably would have cut an official check to pay for the investment from the loan proceeds, but there's no circle of funds going through some secret account.
Hamilton Center.
Thank you, Speaker. This petition is for potential debtors' identity validation and financial due diligence that will safeguard people's wealth and equity in property from fraudulent loan applications, specifically in cases of third-party representation using notarized affidavits by or for loan handling lawyers that may benefit themselves and or their affiants.
Panama Papers reveal onshore tax shelters and offshore tax havens where rich people who profit from financial piracy stash plundered loot around the world.
Maybe he doesn't want the American people, all of you watching tonight, to know that he's paid nothing in federal tax. He didn't pay any federal income tax. So if he's paid zero.
As far as the deficit is concerned, I do believe it is a major problem. I find that the principles of fiscal management have eroded over the years, and I would question the very nature of the business practices we implement in this country, which challenge the wealth creation concept. I believe from a personal point of view that my wealth has been confiscated. I have lots of friends who feel the same way. Any taxpayer can sign a promise to pay money for a tax credit wind bill private imaginary dollar as a tax credit saver tax bill maker, that a Treasury conversion reissues a public notional national debt real dollar to its holder in due course. European Central Bank Governor Jean Trichet warned all signatures will be honored and people must be careful.
Signature will be honored. That is essential. That's the reason why we always said be very careful in all what you're doing. It is the system which is at stake. The benign neglect of the markets, the benign neglect, I have to say also, of the governments, individually and collectively, let the thing go.
And Governor of the Bank of England, Sir Mervyn King, grieved not enough had been done to prevent the failure of the system.
With the benefit of hindsight, we should have shouted from the rooftops that a system had been built in which banks were too important to fail, that banks had grown too quickly and borrowed too much, and that so-called light touch regulation hadn't prevented any of this. And in the crisis we tried, but should have tried harder, to persuade everyone of the need to recapitalise the banks sooner and by more. We should have preached that the lessons of history were being forgotten because banking crises have happened before.
We raised taxes on the wealthiest 1% so that we could lower them for the middle class. And we're continuing to look for ways to make our tax system more fair. Right now, we have a system that encourages wealthy Canadians to use private corporations to pay a lower tax rate than middle-class Canadians. That's not fair, and we're going to fix it.
Systems that we're talking about are currently legal. We see that, though, the implications of these structures create an unequal playing field. So we don't think that they're fair. So what we're really doing is closing down loopholes.
Which in my tax shelter small print is a rent-paid mortgage-backed securities secret loan-dependent tax credit note that I signed as a tax credit maker to offset rent-paid cost of mortgage interest income tax losses in revenue shortfalls for 10 years, until the mortgage failure to roll over in default, when the mortgage holder billed tax credit note principal contingent liability from my private account as the tax saver signee, and the discount note holder for value rebilled the same tax credit note principal paid on public account due to my signature signed as a taxpayer. Which is Magna Carta loophole twice paid tax credit deficit dollars. Canadian money is a loonie, which is coined to cash banknotes in circulation the way cash flows today. Money changers charge rent-seeking bank interest on fictitious bill principal collected through retail and investment bank accounts until tax arbitrage rebills tax credit paper conversions for cash in central bank accounts, hidden from the Treasury, not reported in the budget. A universal bank transaction control number and double entry accounting will check retail and investment bank tax credit transactions in central bank balances. The incredible tax loophole issue is easy to fix with a universal bank transaction control number for tax revenue protection that members of Parliament may solve the problem.
It will help our tax authorities enforce tax laws and combat tax evasion.
We are taking an important first step toward a new regulatory regime.
Yesterday, Federal Finance Minister Jim Flaherty encouraged critics to read the panel's report with an open mind.
To think about the need for consumer protection, to think about what has been happening in the world, and to take a Canadian approach.
In the meantime, Flaherty doesn't want to say whether he expects that approach to include a court fight.
It's a constitutional challenge to the Bank of Canada and the Minister of Finance in refusing to give interest-free loans to the federal and provincial governments, which was the central reason the bank was set up initially in 1937.
One is underestimating Galati in his latest fight over the Bank of Canada's business. His cases can seem improbable.
In this case, what is your hope? What changes post the ruling that you're hoping for?
My hope is that the court declare that the government is bound by the legislation and cannot simply hand over that decision-making to foreign private bankers. The other part of the challenge, which goes hand in hand with this whole banking fraud that's going on, is against the Minister of Finance and the budgetary process. Since 1215 in the Magna Carta, because only Parliament can impose taxes, Parliament will not impose taxes, cannot impose taxes before the government tells the House of Commons how it plans to spend that money in the next session. The speech from the throne is a constitutional requirement before the budget is actually passed. Problem with the budget in our country is there's a sleight of hand that goes on. Our expenditure needs are $280 billion. We're going to have revenue of $240 billion. Therefore, we need to borrow $40 billion, and that's our deficit for the year. Well, that's not true. They collect or could collect a lot more than that, but then they transfer back to taxpayers. They transfer back money in tax credits. And then they say, we have $240 billion, we need to spend $280. If they could have an intelligent debate on whether or not they want to run a $40 billion deficit or shave the tax credits and run a balanced budget. And so that's a very nasty sleight of hand that's going on with our budgetary process, which we say is unconstitutional. Parliament can be as nincompoop as they want.
so long as they don't inflict constitutional violations.
It's very reassuring. Thank you.
I know, but that's the law. However, that's not the case before you. The case before you is that there is an executive breach of a constitutional requirement by the Minister of Finance with respect to the budget process, and that as a result, the legislation that comes out of Parliament breaches the constitutional right to no taxation without representation. Why? The MPs are blindfolded. By removing and not revealing the true revenues of Parliament, which is the only body which can constitutionally impose tax, and thus approve the proposed spending from the speech from the throne, the Minister of Finance is removing the elected MP's ability to properly review and debate the budget and pass its expenditure and corresponding taxing provisions through the elected representatives of the House of Commons. The right to vote includes the right to effective representation. If the MPs are blindfolded by executive constitutional breaches by the Minister of Finance, how does that ensure effective representation?
So, my submission to you is what could be more important to Parliament's functioning than the debate of the budget, process of the budget. And that's why in our Constitution, it's very clear in the Constitution Act 1867 that that it must be in the House of Commons.
So in blunt terms, if you're telling me a Parliament wishes to act in an incompetent way, that's up to Parliament.
Well, Your Lordship is certainly using blunt words. It's not for me to say whether these are
I'm pitching it as a hypothetical.
Yeah, yes, exactly. That's right. I would prefer that. As an officer of the Crown, I would prefer that. Is the way our Constitution works is they make the laws. Once the laws are on the books, our judiciary scrutinizes them for conformity with the Constitution. But wisdom is not something that wisdom of legislation is not in the bailiwick of courts, as I understand it.
So if a bill comes before Parliament and the information is defective, I mean, there's not enough information there to make a meaningful decision, the remedy is what you're telling me is...
Well, I guess the remedy is this, is that we have elections every at least 5 years, the Constitution mandates. So the remedy would be is that people would vote in a party that would pass a different law.
So you're saying if Parliament wishes to pass legislation without having the full wherewithal, the full knowledge of what that legislation is all about, that's okay?
That's up to Parliament, because my next point is that Parliament is supreme in its deliberations.
That's true, but once again, your bottom line, I think, is you're telling me if you have a problem with what occurred here, your complaint should be to your representative and not to the court.
Yes, sir.
All
yes.
right.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah. Yeah. That's my submission.
The consultation paper looks at tax planning used at private corporations in detail and sets out some potential policy responses. We want to hear from Canadians about how these policies would affect them, where we have it right, and where we can improve.
Financial crime is corroding Canada, impacting everything from housing costs to gang violence to people's retirement funds. All right, joining me now for more on this project is Christian Lebrecht. He is a professor at Queen's University, the director of the Queen's Institute of Intergovernmental Relations, also a professor at RMC in Kingston, and a longtime senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Professor, great to see you. Welcome back.
Anthony, good morning.
So obviously, this paints a pretty grim picture of the situation in this country. And I want to get in a sense, I know this is a big topic, but when it comes to Canada itself, maybe compare it to other countries, how attractive is Canada for financial criminals?
Well, look, there's a Treasury estimate in the United States that about $113 billion gets laundered in and through Canada on an annual basis. That's astounding, given the size of our economy. Canada is a highly connected country. We have lots of diaspora groups. We have lots of companies that are highly globally connected, and we have a very stable financial system and a whole host of places that you can ultimately stash your money. And we know this from the Royal Commission on Money Laundering in British Columbia that has laid out both estimates in terms of size as well as the methods that are being used. An Australian colleague coined the term snow washing and the Vancouver method for the attractiveness of this particular country in terms of people from around the globe parking their illicit gains.
But that number by itself is astounding. And in your book, you talk about the chances of getting caught are almost nil. Civil and criminal asset forfeiture is weak, and penalties are negligible. Is this a lack of law on the books, a lack of enforcement, a combination of both?
Yeah, there's a whole host of issues at play here. Look, for instance, there's the famous case of the Hells Angels Vancouver Clubhouse that has taken 16 years in terms of asset forfeiture. That's just sort of one example. So there's a challenge in terms of the legislation that we have in place. There's a challenge in terms of the enforcement capabilities. You see the challenges that the RCMP has in various areas of law enforcement. Financial crime is arguably the most complex crime that we know. It requires extremely sophisticated skill sets, and those skill sets by and large are simply not there within the RCMP. To the best of my knowledge, no one in this country has ever been charged, let alone convicted, of transnational money laundering. But you also have significant challenges, for instance, in the way our financial intelligence unit, FinTrack, is set up as an administrative unit rather than as an enforcement unit. By way of example, the largest fine FinTrack has levied in this country against one of the banks is $7.7 million. Austrac in Australia has leveled fines, 2 fines of over $1 billion against 2 of the 4 large banks. And I think ultimately there's not much political will, because it's politicians, I think, see it as, on the one hand, free money that they didn't have to work for to bring to the country, so as a result they're not all that interested. It's not a top electoral issue. And so the book is trying to raise awareness, to raise public awareness and raise the level of informed public debate to make sure that Canadians understand this is not a victimless crime, that they have to live with the consequences every way in terms of public safety and their cost of living.
The wealth of our middle class has been ripped from their homes and then redistributed all across the world. But that is the past, and now we are looking only to the future.
To Honourable John Oliver, thank you for reviewing my tax whistleblower affidavit that I reported my role as a gullible taxpayer to the police to investigate. After 12 years in Superior Court and 6 more in Federal Court, the judiciary defers me to you about the law.
U.S. authorities have slapped TD Bank with a historic $3 billion fine after the bank pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit money laundering.
TD Bank created an environment that allowed financial crime to flourish. By making its services convenient for criminals, it became one.
Now the U.S. investigation has ended in the largest ever penalty of its kind. Nisha Patel is tracking the story for us. So Nisha, authorities said TD essentially just allowed a criminal organization to flourish.
Yeah, Adrian, and TD actually has a really big presence in the United States, and officials there have been investigating how fentanyl traffickers actually bribed TD bank tellers to launder $670 million in drug money through its bank accounts. TD has admitted it's guilty and will pay a record fine of more than $3 billion. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland said even high-level TD executives knew that there were serious problems and did nothing to fix them.
TD Bank chose profits over compliance in order to keep its costs down. That decision is now costing the bank billions of dollars.
Garland also said criminal investigations into individual TD employees are ongoing and no one is off limits.
Ruly English language is used to write bills of law that each word has a single meaning and each meaning a single word. It is utilized with a set of ambiguity-avoiding rules. The syntax methodology delivers a triune construct how to position three correlated interfaces for data flow, workflow, and cash flow across serial work tray inputs and outputs. Any causative effect that distorts or disconnects or disrupts any part of the triune language will appear as a system gap or loophole to be closed to modify the software code until it reads as required for results and legal compliance. Any breakdown of business function which is generally observed as an out-of-order work sequence, independent inputs and outputs, disconnected work, and dead-end processing is noted and documented as system gaps. System gaps may appear in one or more work trays, which cross business areas in the total scope of policy behind coded ways and means, the object being to either change how technology controls work or change the law. A work environment controls received work B and initial processing C, work management D, to monitor in process E, and results processing F that continues on to G, completed work, and H, management reports. The triune construct is used to analyze task-level work inputs and outputs, and digitize policy rules A that regulates work C and enforces the law F to manage data flow and cash flow through coded ways and means. This analysis illustrates a plausible quasi-usufruct title acquiring bank scenario that relies on bank law in Step 2 that a bank could set up loans and mortgages, each with the same number, to defraud by design in Step 3. Specifically, where a check is delivered to a bank for deposit to the credit of a person, and the bank credits him with the amount of the check, the bank acquires all the rights and powers of a holder in due course of the check. This example illustrates a plausible quasi-tort of conversion collecting bank scenario that a bank could set up unacknowledged, unnumbered loans in Step 3 geared to defraud by design. My experience defending a quasi-tort of a collecting Canadian bank claim in 2002 that ruled debt without trial in 2009, and also following former U.S. President Trump bank loan deals in litigation in 2023 seem to connect similar system dots in my 2017 OSC Bank System Whistleblower file, still pending investigation, not closed in 2025. This ABCP acquire-to-distribute business model illustrates three possible reinsured scam scenarios that, if one follows the money gleaned from improperly earned income tax credits, it appears taxpayers carried twice paid loans and mortgages in the legal workings of some $32 billion wind bills in capitalism without capital non-bank holdings in the 2009 Montreal Accord that Canadian courts settled the 2008 global credit crunch. This review of Dirty Money recommends further reading that Canadian University Law School professors are critical of bank law, which is documented to review at www.tonycrawford.com.